The Axeman of New Orleans, a city drenched in jazz and fear. New Orleans, 1918. The Crescent City was alive in ways few other places could be. The war in Europe was drawing to a close. The brass bands played in the streets. The hum of the riverboats rolled across the Mississippi. Music pulsed from every alleyway, every barroom. It was a city of color and rhythm, where people clung to joy as if trying to drown out the echoes of war and poverty. Yet beneath the laughter, a storm gathered. The air was thick, heavy with humidity and something else, something unnamed. A fear waiting to be born. In the back streets near Upper Line and Magnolia Streets, behind rows of modest wooden homes, the city's heartbeat slowed one May night. No one knew that within those quiet walls, New Orleans was about to meet its most enduring nightmare, a figure who would step out of the shadows and into infamy. It began in the early hours of May 23, 1918. At 3 a.m., Andrew Maggio, a barber and part-time musician, stumbled home after a night of drinking. He and his brother, Joseph, were neighbors. Joseph ran a small grocery shop with his wife, Catherine. The Maggios were part of New Orleans' thriving Italian-American community, hardworking, family-oriented, trying to make an honest living amid suspicion and prejudice. Andrew's slurred footsteps echoed in the still night. But as he neared his brother's house, he froze. Through the half-open door, he caught the faint, metallic scent of blood. Inside, the scene was carnage. Joseph lay slumped across the bed, his throat slit open, his skull battered beyond recognition. Beside him, Catherine clung to life, her breathing ragged, the pillow beneath her soaked crimson. She tried to speak, but only blood bubbled from her lips. Within minutes, she was gone. A razor, its handle slick with gore, sat on the nightstand. In the adjoining bathroom, an axe, its blade smeared, leaned against the tub. And in the kitchen, the back door had been crudely tampered with. One wooden panel was missing, pried away as if someone had carefully carved out space to reach inside and unlatch the lock. Police swarmed the scene by dawn. There was no theft, no sign of struggle. The killer had entered silently, killed with precision, and vanished into the night. The blood-stained razor was soon traced back to Andrew's barbershop. When questioned, he stammered that he'd lost it days before. Officers arrested him briefly, but his alibi, drunken sleep, was confirmed by witnesses. He was released, but doubt lingered in the humid air. The case gripped the city's newspapers. The Times-Picayune called it one of the most brutal crimes in New Orleans history. Yet after a few weeks, the headlines faded. People moved on. Perhaps, they thought, it had been a robbery gone wrong, a tragedy, but nothing more. They were wrong. On June 27, 1918, just over a month later, the terror returned. In a small apartment above a grocery on the corner of Dorganois and La Harpe Streets, Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe were attacked in their sleep. Louis was a businessman, Harriet his mistress, something that scandalized the press almost as much as the crime itself. When neighbors heard moaning from upstairs, they found both victims lying in a pool of blood. Louis's skull was split open. Harriet's face was a mask of bruises. Once again, the weapon was an axe, this one belonging to the victims themselves. And again, the back door panel had been carefully removed. Both survived the initial assault, though Harriet lingered between life and death for weeks. Detectives tried to question her, but her mind wandered under the effects of morphine. In her delirium, she accused Louis of being a German spy, an echo of wartime paranoia sweeping the nation. Harriet eventually died of her injuries. Louis recovered, only to find himself arrested on suspicion of her murder. He was later cleared, but the damage was done. The police had no other suspects. Meanwhile, whispers began in the Italian neighborhoods, whispers of a madman who crept through the dark with an axe and a taste for blood. The papers gave him a name, the Axeman. By late summer, fear had taken root. Doors that had always been left open at night were now locked and barred. Families began sleeping in shifts, keeping weapons under their pillows. The Axeman's legend grew with every headline. Some believed he targeted Italians specifically, a theory fueled by the backgrounds of most victims. Others said he was an escaped lunatic or a demon from hell itself. On August 5, 1918, Anna Schneider, a young, heavily pregnant woman, was found bleeding in her bed. Her scalp was torn open, her sheets drenched in red. But Anna survived, one of the few who did. Days later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, though she could remember little of the attack except a dark-clad man standing over her. Less than a week later, another grocer, Joseph Romano, was struck down in his home. His nieces, sleeping in the next room, heard the thud of blows and ran to find him bleeding on the floor. They glimpsed a tall man in a dark suit and slouch hat fleeing the scene. Romano died 2 days later. The city spiraled into panic. Shopkeepers began arming themselves. Some families hung crucifixes over their doors. Others slept in shifts, clutching pistols. Yet the police, though now patrolling nightly, could not find the phantom who slipped in and out like smoke. Even the Times-Picayune warned readers. The Axeman may strike again at any time. Lock your doors. Sharpen your senses. Pray. March 13, 1919. A letter arrived at the Times-Picayune newsroom addressed simply, "From hell." It began, "Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, they have never caught me and they never will. They cannot catch me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." The writer claimed he delighted in murder, but only of those who did not jazz it out. He continued, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on the night of March 19th, I will pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I will spare all those in whose homes a jazz band is playing. One thing is certain, those who do not jazz it out that night will get the axe." It was signed, "The Axeman." The city erupted. That night, every dance hall and parlor in New Orleans overflowed with music. Jazz bands played from sunset to dawn. Even families who couldn't afford musicians dragged phonographs to their porches and let them spin until the records wore thin. From the French Quarter to the Bywater, the city roared with sound, trumpets, clarinets, and drums rising together in a wild, defiant symphony. Some said the streets looked like Mardi Gras. Others swore they saw shadows moving in rhythm with the horns. When dawn came, not a single murder was reported. The Axeman, it seemed, had kept his word. The months that followed were quiet, too quiet. Then, in August 1919, grocer Steve Boca was attacked in his sleep. The pattern was the same. Entry through the back, blows with an axe. The weapon left behind. Boca survived but could recall almost nothing of his attacker except a large, dark figure. In September, Sarah Lauman was found unconscious in her bed, her face bloodied. Her injuries matched the others. She lived, but the Axeman vanished again before police arrived. Then came October 27, 1919, the night that sealed the legend. In the home of Mike Pepitone, chaos erupted. His wife awoke to find her husband's body covered in blood. A tall figure in dark clothing loomed in the doorway, an axe glinting in the moonlight. Then, as she screamed, he fled, disappearing into the humid night. Mike Pepitone's murder was the final confirmed attack attributed to the Axeman. The killings stopped as suddenly as they began. New Orleans exhaled, but fear remained, lingering like the echo of a trumpet long after the note fades. The morning of March 14, 1919, began like any other in New Orleans, humid, slow, and steeped in jazz. But that day, a letter arrived at the offices of the Times-Picayune that would change everything. The envelope was unremarkable, addressed in a shaky hand. Inside was a single page written in chilling, theatrical prose. The writer called himself the Axeman. "They have never caught me, and they never will. They cannot catch me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils that on Tuesday night, March 19th, I will pass over New Orleans. If every home has a jazz band going, I shall not kill. If not, then beware." The letter, now part of police archives and reprinted in several New Orleans newspapers of the time, threw the city into frenzy. Whether written by the killer himself or by a hoaxer, its effect was undeniable. Within hours, Times-Picayune editions sold out. Reporters fanned across the city, photographing terrified citizens and interviewing grocers, bar owners, and musicians. And when Tuesday night came, March 19, 1919, New Orleans didn't sleep. Jazz echoed from every street. Brass bands set up on balconies. Families who had never touched an instrument hired musicians to play inside their homes. Pianos clattered, trumpets wailed, clarinets wept into the night. Even skeptics found themselves lighting lanterns and keeping their doors open, anything to appease the demon of the axe. And as the Axeman had promised, no one died that night. The letter cemented the Axeman's legend. He had transformed from a faceless killer into a phantom, a mythic presence that seemed to float above the city's fear. Police Commissioner Frank Mooney called it a hoax designed to terrorize. But detectives privately admitted something darker. The letter's timing matched the killer's rhythm. The city had been quiet for months, too quiet. And then, just as suddenly as the letter faded from headlines, the murders resumed. On August 10, 1919, grocer Steve Baca was attacked in his home. He survived, staggering into the street covered in blood, screaming that a tall man in dark clothes had struck him. His description matched earlier reports. 2 weeks later, Sarah Lauman, another local woman, was found unconscious in her bed, her face bruised and slashed. She, too, survived, but her memory of the attack was blurred, as though from a fevered dream. Then, on October 27, 1919, came the final blow. At the corner of South Scott and Loa Streets, the Pepitone family, Mike Pepitone, his wife, and their children, lived a quiet life above their small grocery store. That night, Mrs. Pepitone was startled awake by a crash downstairs. She descended the stairs and froze. Her husband lay motionless on the floor, his head shattered by a heavy axe. Blood coated the walls like paint. A tall man in a dark hat turned toward her, then bolted through the back door, vanishing into the humid night. Mrs. Pepitone's screams woke the neighborhood. Police arrived within minutes. They found the same clues as before: a chiseled door panel, a bloody axe left behind, no money missing. It was the Axeman's final known strike. With the Pepitone murder, the killing spree that had haunted New Orleans for over a year came to an abrupt stop. Detectives formed dozens of theories. Some believed the Axeman was a burglar, someone who broke into homes to steal and killed only when interrupted. But the lack of theft in nearly every case contradicted that idea. Others proposed the killer was motivated by ethnic hatred. Nearly all victims were Italian immigrants, many of them grocers, a pattern too consistent to ignore. The Italian-American Tribune claimed the Axeman was part of an anti-Italian secret society. Meanwhile, psychiatrists speculated the killer suffered from a compulsive mania, drawn to the ritual of the attacks, entering silently, striking with tools found at the scene, and leaving his weapon behind as if to mark his territory. But in truth, no theory fit all the evidence. By early 1920, the police files had swollen to hundreds of pages: sketches, blood samples, affidavits, crime scene photos, all pointing in different directions. And then, an unexpected twist. In December 1920, newspapers reported a strange killing in Los Angeles, California. A woman named Esther Albano Pepitone, widow of the Axeman's last known victim, shot and killed a man named Joseph Momfer, sometimes spelled Momfrey. She told police that Momfer was the Axeman, that he had murdered her husband in New Orleans and tracked her to California. She said she had recognized him, lured him in, and taken revenge. Local authorities charged her with manslaughter but gave her a light sentence, citing emotional insanity. When New Orleans police read the story, their curiosity reignited. Momfer was indeed known to them, a small-time criminal, a con man, and rumored leader of a blackmail ring preying on Italian merchants. But could he have been the Axeman? Historical records are murky. Some archives show a man by that name active in New Orleans during 1918 to 1919. Others suggest no such person existed at all. Contemporary crime historians like Miriam C. Davis, the Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, 2017 note that no verifiable evidence ever linked Mumford to the murders. Still, the story stuck, partly because it offered closure to an otherwise unsolved nightmare. By the early 1920s, New Orleans had moved on. The city's attention returned to its booming music scene, Prohibition-era smuggling, and Mardi Gras parades. The Axeman became a ghost story, an urban legend told in dimly lit bars while trumpets blared outside. Newspapers stopped running editorials about him. Detectives retired, files gathered dust. Yet, every so often, a strange rumor would surface. A door chiseled open in the same way. A grocer's body found near his store. A whisper that the Axeman had returned. None of those later cases were ever confirmed to be connected. Of all the Axeman's legacies, perhaps the strangest was the music he inspired. Weeks after his infamous letter, composer Joseph John Davila published a song titled "The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz Don't Scare Me, Papa." Its cover art showed a cartoon demon wielding an axe, dancing beside a terrified couple. The song became a local hit, part novelty, part nervous laughter. It was as if the city, having survived a year of terror, had decided to turn its fear into rhythm. That's New Orleans, a place where tragedy becomes melody, where horror and joy mingle like brass and bourbon. In recent decades, criminologists and historians have revisited the Axeman case using modern forensic understanding. Patterns in his crimes suggest he may have been one of America's earliest organized serial killers. His consistent method, forced entry through door panels, attacks with household axes, and non-sexual, rage-driven violence point toward a calculated, ritualistic personality. Some experts, like former FBI profiler John Douglas, have compared the Axeman's behavior to later killers such as the Zodiac or BTK, offenders who thrived on public terror as much as on the act of murder itself. Douglas theorized that the Axeman may have been a voyeuristic thrill seeker, returning to crime scenes or reading newspaper coverage to relive the excitement. Another theory, put forth by historian Richard Warner, argues that there may have been multiple Axemen, that copycats emerged after the first attacks, exploiting the hysteria. The lack of forensic technology at the time, no fingerprint matching, no DNA, made such mimicry easy to conceal. Whatever the truth, the killer's identity remains one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries. More than a century later, the Axeman of New Orleans remains both a symbol and a warning. He represents the thin line between folklore and fear, how a city can transform a murderer into a myth to make sense of the senseless. His crimes inspired countless retellings, from American Horror Story, Coven, where the Axeman is reimagined as a jazz-loving specter, to documentaries and novels that continue to explore the blurred edges between fact and fiction. But beneath the sensationalism, real families were destroyed. The Maggios, the Bessemers, the Romanos, the Pepitones. Their names fade from headlines, yet their tragedy lingers in the city's collective memory. New Orleans still tells his story on humid nights when the air is heavy and the sound of jazz drifts through open windows. And some say that if you listen closely, you can hear it, the faint echo of an axe against wood, keeping time with the music. In the archives of the New Orleans Police Department lies a yellowed report, dated October 1919. Its final line reads, "Investigation ongoing, suspect unknown." Over 100 years later, that line remains true. The Axeman of New Orleans was never identified, never captured, never even confirmed as a single man. He was a reflection of the city itself, passionate, chaotic, mysterious, and haunted by its own rhythm. And in that rhythm, he found his stage. He came by night with a blade and a rhythm. He struck without reason, vanished without trace, and left behind the sound of jazz echoing through fear. The Axeman of New Orleans, a name etched in blood and brass, forever part of the city's song. If this story gripped you, hit like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Spectrum, your source for authentic, verified, and meticulously researched true crime documentaries. We uncover the truth behind the legends, separate fact from folklore, and take you deeper into the minds and mysteries of history's most chilling criminals. Stay tuned for the next investigation, because the shadows of the past still have stories to tell.